Today I wanted to fill you in on the current apartment rental situation in Spain, what options you have, and how you can overcome one of the biggest issues, finding a landlord that will accommodate you, because that's been a really big problem. So one of my business associates has been attempting to rent an apartment in Spain, but she hasn't been successful at it yet. She's a woman from Eastern Europe, she's married, she has one child, and she's been trying to rent an apartment for the past months, probably like 4 to 5 months. And she's been trying to rent even in different regions of Spain. And she hasn't been successful at it because, first of all, right now, the laws in Spain are constructed in a way to benefit the tenant and not the landlord. And now you might think, well, why is that bad for her? You would think that that's good for her, but in reality, it really isn't. Because the truth is, if you, let's say you're a landlord and you rent out an apartment to somebody in Spain, it's actually very difficult for you to evict that person, especially if that person has a child. And that's been her biggest problem, It's almost as if the married couples with kids are being punished the most. And it should be the exact opposite. That's the fault of the government, because the government makes it really difficult for both. Because for the landlord, it's like, okay, if I take somebody in who has a child or who has children, it's going to be hard for me to evict that person because the laws are constructed in a way that the government says you have to be very careful who you evict and how you evict them, because we don't want to have any people on the streets. They make very liberal policies for tenants. Potentially that's good, or not potentially, certainly that's good for like poorer tenants and tenants that have bad intentions, that let's say want to move into an apartment and then not pay their rent on time, or when they're in a situation where they know they can't be evicted so easily because they have kids and they just recently lost their job, then they can take advantage of that situation. Whereas people who legitimately want to rent an apartment because they want to work and they want to contribute and they have no bad intentions at all, like they want to pay their rent on time every single month, yet they can't find any person to rent an apartment to them because, again, the laws are constructed in a way that landlords really have to think twice who to rent their apartment to and who not. I feel like this situation needs to change. Spain needs to create policies that are more towards the landlord, more focused towards the landlord, where the landlord knows that, okay, I'm protected in an instance where someone's in my apartment and they haven't paid their rent in 3 months. Things happen in life. We might get laid off and, income is tight for whatever reason, inflation, or maybe your husband got laid off, or your job, your employer decides to give you a few hours than they did a couple of months ago. And so you have to find a way to supplement that income. And so because of that, I feel like there has to be more of like a pro-landlord stance. When a country is very pro-landlord, I wouldn't say completely polarized. I want to see a bit of a turn where landlords are protected against bad tenants, because bad tenants exist everywhere. Bad tenants are parasites. They know about the legal situation. They know that they are protected by law. They can't get evicted so easily, so they're going to take advantage of it. A parasite is a parasite. But again, sometimes people get into really bad economic situations because things happen in life. There has to be a limit of what somebody can accept. If you're a landlord and that person hasn't paid in 4 months, you've got to make a call. If she or he was your tenant for, let's say, 2 years, they have always paid on time, and then there comes a moment, when they're late on their monthly rental payments, let's say once or twice. Okay, you can probably think, okay, that person has stuck with me for a long time, income has been consistent, they're not facing real life challenges, so I've got to be thoughtful too, right? So you have to be reasonable. Like, as a landlord, you have to be reasonable, but you also can't be idiotic. And if you're in a place where the law forces you to be idiotic, then it's even more difficult to be reasonable because you're not really having many options. That's what I want to see. That's the change I want to see in Spain. And so for her, it's been really tough. And I told her, look, you don't just look in certain areas with a lot of tourism, because in those places, in those cities, those areas, those states, it will be harder to rent for the simple reason that so many Airbnbs are there. Like 90% Airbnbs and only 10% of people are looking to rent out long term. Having an Airbnb is just so much more convenient because people come and go and there's no long-term rental contract in place, and people can't really stay in that Airbnb because the next day another person shows up. You have another booking, right? Or a couple days later. It's just more controllable. That's why so many people are doing Airbnb in Spain these days, because the Spanish government isn't protecting landlords the way they should. And so people are looking into short-term rentals like Airbnb, Virgo, whatever, so they can protect themselves. And you always have to look after yourself if it's your business. So I feel like Spain has to make a drastic paradigm shift very soon, because again, the good tenants are being punished by not being able to rent. And so I feel like there has to be more balance. It's very imbalanced, very unbalanced, right? So something's got to happen there. But for her not being able to rent an apartment after 7 years of experience in Spain, I know she's a hard worker. She works her butt off. She takes good care of her family, of her child, right? She's a great mother, but she's not able to rent anything. And it's kind of sad because, again, good people get punished and bad people get rewarded. And you also have to understand the whole situation from a landlord's perspective, where they have to be really careful. I already said this at the beginning of the video. And so I told her what you can do is, just look at areas where you see a lot of empty apartments, not touristic areas, because that's where people go to. That's going to be harder for you to rent. More Airbnbs, more demand for short-term rentals, and the people who work there, it's just much harder. So go to an area with less competition. More supply, less competition, that's where you want to look for. That's what you want to try, because she has tried other things and they haven't really worked. Nothing has come to fruition for her. One day she will get lucky, right? So good things will happen eventually. This is something where you have to consider both sides, and the landlord has to be reasonable. But at the same time, right, the law needs to be in place to not fully benefit one party or only benefit one party, because if someone can evict you after you being late on your payment for like 3 days, I think that's ridiculous too. Things happen in life, right? So there has to be like a middle ground that's lacking in many places. And so for me personally, the reason why I bought an apartment in Spain in an area where I can rent it out short term is because I was aware of these long-term rental problems, and especially being a landlord, and my intention is to rent out the property eventually. I wanted to be protected by the decisions that I made. If the country doesn't protect me, if I want to do a long-term rental contract and the country doesn't protect me, then I have to do whatever I have to do to protect myself. And that's what I want to explain to you today, that you make your own choices and you decide where you want to put your money. And that's why it's very important to consider the legal situation in the country. It's good in Spain because you can own an apartment 100%, you can own land, you can own property, you can own a company, you can do all of these things that you can do in many other countries, but there's still certain things to be aware of. What's your take on apartment rental laws? Do you feel like they should be balanced? Do you feel like there should be more pro-landlord, or do you feel like there should be more pro-tenant? What's your take on this topic? Thank you for watching.